Paula Yoo. The book is From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry, the killing of Vincent Chin and the trial that inspired the Asian American movement. It's an account of the first federal trial of a civil rights crime against an Asian American and the complex, moving stories of the crime that led to it and the lives of the victim, the perpetrators, the activists that were involved. It's the only book for any age group, adult or young readers, about the Vincent Chin case. And for those of you who admired Phil House's book about Claudette Colvin, or perhaps the 57 Bus, I think you'll find lots to admire in From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry. So welcome, Paula Yoo.
Okay, hello.
Hello, Paula.
Hi, hello.
There you are. I wondered, you know, it's hard to escape the news and hard to escape that in the presidential debate last week, the president of the United States used the term China plague to refer to the coronavirus, and that in the wake of his illness last weekend, there were Senate candidates tweeting about making China pay for giving our president the virus. Along with that, there's a reported rise in racist attacks on Asian Americans. So how does the current situation in which Asian Americans are being targeted and being victimized in relation to this pandemic relate to the story that you're telling in From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry?
Well, it's actually the parallels are absolutely uncanny. Basically, in the late 70s, early 80s, you know, we had more than one oil crisis. The big three of Michigan, GM, Ford, and Chrysler, they were making what were known as gas guzzlers, these cars that used up a lot of gasoline. And there were these new Japanese import companies like Datsun, which eventually became Nissan, Honda, Toyota, and they were making more fuel efficient cars. And as a result, the American car companies, they couldn't keep up. There was basically a trade war happening back then, and Americans were buying these smaller, more fuel efficient cars. And as a result, in the 1980s, in the early 80s, there were national news footage, you know, on the 6 o'clock news with Dan Rather or whatever, where you would see auto workers, mostly white or, you know, basically not Asian, bashing a Japanese import car for $1, you know, a swing with a giant sledgehammer. And that got the Asian American community a little nervous because they were like, uh-oh, we're starting to blame a bad economy, a recession, hundreds of thousands of people being laid off because of the trade war that we're having with Japan. This might trickle down and affect us just as Americans of Asian descent in terms of being treated with racism. And then that happened with the Vincent Chin case, and that really brought that to light. And it's been really interesting to see, and also very depressing and scary to see the same thing happen here, because I remember hearing in December, January, February about this virus, this disease in China. And as it started to escalate, a lot of my Asian American friends and myself, we started to talk amongst ourselves saying, watch your back, this is a little scary. And then before you knew it, they were calling it the Wuhan virus. They were saying Asian people eat bats and dogs and disgusting things, which is why just all the stereotypes started to happen. And then the crimes started to happen. There have been reported between February and between March and late August of this year, the FBI has reported more than 2,500 anti-Asian hate crimes or bias crimes that have happened because of the fact that everyone is using very derogatory terms like China virus to describe COVID-19. So just the parallels, seeing it, I just couldn't believe it. I was not expecting it, and it's unfortunate that history keeps repeating itself. And I think that this book is a good reminder of that, and how hopefully we can prevent history from repeating itself in the future. We have to stop this pattern.
So tell us a little bit about Vincent Chin and about the case. Summarize it, if you will, in a few sentences for those who may not know the story.
Sure thing. Vincent Chin is actually very famous for a lot of people in the Asian American community. It was a huge story in the 80s and kind of fell. People kind of forgot about the story, and it's come back up again. Basically, Vincent Chin was a 27-year-old Chinese American man who went out with the guys for a bachelor party on June 19th, 1982. They were at a strip club, and while they were there, two white men got into a fight with them, led to a fight in the parking lot, eventually led to the two men, a white man and his stepson, chasing after them and basically beating him to death with a baseball bat. You fast forward 9 months later, he dies. March 1983, the judge feels sorry for the two white men, saying that they're good citizens. The famous quote that he said was, "Let the punishment fit the criminal, not the crime. These guys are not a flight risk. They're never going to do it again. We're going to give them 3 years probation." They pled guilty to manslaughter and a $3,000 fine each. And then that's when the Asian American community, which up until that point had been very quiet, didn't want to rock the boat, didn't, just trying to work hard, the American dream, not try to upset anything in this country, they banded together and said, this is wrong, this is unfair, this is unjust, and we need to reconsider the sentence. Eventually it led to the Department of Justice doing a grand jury investigation. The two men were indicted on violating Vincent Chin's civil rights on 2 counts. And eventually the stepfather was found guilty, sentenced to 25 years in jail, but unfortunately due to a trial error, an alleged trial error, there was another, he was acquitted and eventually found in a second trial not to be guilty. And so to this day, although we lost the battle, I think we won the war, in the sense of Vincent Chin has become a symbol for his legacy is reminding us to always constantly fight back against anti-Asian racism.
It's a pretty complex story. And not a story that has been widely told in outside of the press and outside of archives. So tell us a little bit about your research for the book and how you found the story, but also how you found your way to the core of it. I know it was a pretty long running and intense process for you.
Yeah, I would say, this book sold in 2018, but I would say the story actually started in the early 90s. I had just graduated from college, and I was just got a job. I was got my master's in journalism, so I got a job in Detroit. At the time, I was working at the Seattle Times. It was 1993, and I got a job offer to work at the Detroit News, and it was one of the biggest Gannett papers. It was a huge deal. And my first reaction, and the first reaction of all my friends who were Asian, we all looked at each other and said, "I want to go to Detroit. That's the home of Vincent Chin." So even though the Vincent Chin trial happened in 1984, 1986, it was a good decade afterwards. We all knew who Vincent Chin was. It was actually very famous in the 90s for people like me. So I was a little scared when I went to Detroit, and I was the only, at the time, one of very few Asian Americans, and in fact, Korean Americans living in the city. And I really stuck out because people always, "Oh, you're the Asian girl that went to that nightclub. Oh, you're the Asian girl that went to the grocery store." So, that's how few Asians were in Detroit at that time. And it was even less back in the 80s. But anyway, so I've just always known about Vincent Chin. And then I would say, just throughout the years, I always kept thinking, I can't believe there hasn't been a book. There have been a number of really wonderful essays and chapters in books about Asian American history, but no one's ever done like a full book. And it just always was in the back of my head. And I used to dream, I'll write the Oscar-winning screenplay one day. And then that's what I tried to do a few years ago. And I was talking to my book agent, and she said, "Paula, I can't believe you're not doing a nonfiction book on this, because you already have nonfiction picture books. You were a former journalist. This really would be a great YA book." And then I started thinking about it, and I thought, So then I wrote the proposal, met you, and that's what led us to this. And I found that in doing my research, there's actually quite a bit already out there on Vincent Chin. So in terms of getting books, looking up articles and photos and news, it's all out there. There was a famous Oscar-nominated documentary called Who Killed Vincent Chin that I had seen when it first came out when I was in college. And so I got the DVD for that. A friend of mine, Curtis Chin, did a follow-up called Who's Vincent Chin? And so I had seen that as well. So I had a lot of really good material. But as I started digging into it, I noticed that there were a lot of urban legends that were on the internet. It's two unemployed white auto workers killed Vincent Chin. And it's like, well, technically, Ronald Evans at the time was employed. He was actually a foreman. He was in management at Chrysler. His son had been laid off several months earlier, but was working part-time at a furniture store and was going to college. So there were all these little interesting details that were kind of not adding up. So I realized I need to really dig in with a lot more primary sources, which led to me getting in touch with the National Archives in Chicago. And I think I'm the only person that paid for, I have every single court document from that trial, including even the most obscure things like a motion filed on February 4th, 1983. Who cares about that? But it's there. So I have everything, and I read through everything. And then I also interviewed people that were involved in the case, from two defense lawyers and many people that were activists that were involved in bringing this case to national attention, journalists from back in the day at the Detroit newspapers that covered the article. I talked to people on the phone, and because I used to live in Detroit, I went back there several times and did a lot. I visited the crime site, the strip club where they went, just did a lot of first person reporting as well. So it was pretty intense.
So in relation to research, one of the most, striking moments in the creation of this book for me, and actually I think really one of the most striking moments in my career in some ways, was the email that you wrote me from your car outside Ronald Evans' house in Las Vegas. Evans being the killer in the story. Who's still alive and living in Las Vegas. And you tell us a little bit about your encounter with Ronald Evans, which is off the record, but very much part of the story.
Yeah, well, what had happened was when I first started the book, I tracked down, because I used to be a journalist, but it's actually not that hard because you can find anyone now with Google. And everyone's pretty much a citizen journalist at this point. Anyway, I sent emails and handwritten letters to every single person involved in this case, and just was like I'd love to interview you. Here's all the research I've already done. And luckily, many people wrote back or called me or emailed me and said, hey, let's talk, let's arrange an interview. Ronald Evans was one of the people I tracked down and sent him a typed up letter. And I also got his phone number and I left a couple voicemails, and I didn't have an email though. And I never heard back. And about a year into the research, we were going up to Vegas for my wedding anniversary, because I got married in Vegas, and I love Vegas. I go there every Christmas. It's a holiday tradition. And so we went up there, and I happened to find out where he lived at the time. And so I just went and I knocked on his door, and his wife answered, and I introduced myself, and she said, it's the writer. And it turned out they did receive my phone calls, they did receive my letters, but because of privacy and just because they don't want to speak publicly about this, they just didn't return my letters or my voicemails. But they said that they appreciated what I wrote, and they said they thought it was very kind what I wrote, and they said, okay, come on in. So I got to spend a few hours with them and just talked, and it was a very intense situation. We had a very deep and meaningful conversation, and it was off the record. And then afterwards, I was in my car. My friend actually came with me. He drove me over because he had a car, and I sat, and I think it was like 110 degrees. It was very hot. This is like in July, and it was very, very hot. And he has the air conditioning running, and I'm still sweating, and I'm on my iPhone, and I just was talking into it, sending you the email saying, I just talked to him. This is what happened. It's all off the record, but I just want to paraphrase and summarize what happened. And oh my gosh, here's what he wore. He was watching TV at the time. They gave me a glass of water, and I just did that because I wasn't allowed to take notes. It was an off the record discussion, but I wanted, while it was fresh in my mind, just at least to get it out there, just to make sure that I had for myself an off the record account of what was a highlight, I would say, in my own journalism career and writing career as well. I mean, I'd never done something that intense before, and it really taught me a lot. I think too, I cried also in the car. I have to say, I was very emotionally overcome because I think that no matter what, I think at the end of the day, this story is always painted as, you know, good versus evil, you know, and everything. And this just, I believe that compassion and justice are not mutually exclusive. And that's kind of the big lesson I learned from this.
That's a good moment to pause, I think. It's a terrific book. And as I said in the sort of lead-in, I think it's a timely and important book, a necessary book. So I commend it to our audience. Well, thank you, Paula. I appreciate your time.